Have you activated the transcript?
Regarding
You are the host.
Okay.
I think it's automatically.
No, maybe in the more ...
Si quieren digo otra cosa, no sé, cualquier cosa, a ver si se lee.
Sí.
Muy bien.
Sí. Perfecto.
Gracias.
Todas las visiones, los imaginarios del futuro que vemos en las narrativas de la industria de la tecnología, el futuro es perfecto. No, la tecnología es perfecta, soluciona todos los problemas, pero realmente esta tecnología se va a romper. Por lo tanto, el rol del troubleshooter, de la persona que lo arregle, es fundamental, porque este futuro perfecto no existirá sin que tengamos la persona que lo mantenga. Sí.
Well, it's some lady with brown hair.
Yeah, but it's not in 360, is it? I was just looking at that. It's meant to be in 360, it's not meant to look like that. I've watched it before in 360, but since that upgrade, it looks like that.
Troubleshooting, often we see it as a keyword in manuals of household appliances, the TVs, the smart voice assistants, but also workplace equipment, city infrastructure. So we see it very often.
So troubleshooting for many people now with the complex products and systems that we have, it's a really useful all-encompassing term to cover both when something is broken, but perhaps when something's just not working for a range of reasons, whether it's a power surge or whether it's a clean or a recalibration.
So basically what you do...
Yeah, turn it on.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, here it is. So it's this one because it's turned back because it's in use. When it goes to sleep, what you want to do is just hit this double twice and it should load up these icons.
And if it doesn't?
So troubleshooting has been coming up often in our work at the Emerging Technologies Lab. We've seen different angles of troubleshooting as a concept, as a practice, as a method.
So our work was on automation and robotics and work futures in the Australian construction industry. And people who participated in our research, they really assumed then that in the future people would co-work with robots on construction sites. Within this, of course, they understood that human roles would have to change.
Pues en mi contexto de personas mayores, industria de la tecnología para personas mayores en Melbourne, he visto que, por ejemplo, muchas personas viven cerca de zonas de bushfire, de alto riesgo de incendio, donde es bastante posible también que ocurran inundaciones. Y era interesante simplemente como un ejemplo que quería poner de cómo la tecnología puede romperse.
And you were saying that you would have some sort of walls.
You could put up, go in the ground, and they could, I'm just making this up, but they could come up and just they'd go up for that period, might be 24 hours, and then they go down again. But they save all of these houses from getting wet.
Yeah.
We have Pauli here. Site can't be reached. No worries. So she's going to send us audios of her troubleshooting example.
It's clear to me that text designers also need to be more realistic. So automation won't magically solve every problem, not today, not in the future. Designers should anticipate these challenges and recognize the ongoing need for troubleshooters to bridge the gap between people and technology.
So the right to repair movement really started in the automotive industry, that we should be able to take our cars to an independent repairer and that they should be able to access not only the spare parts but the diagnostic software that they need to diagnose and fix the motor vehicles. In the last 10 or 20 years, we've really noticed the inability to repair almost everything that we buy now across consumer goods, farm equipment, medical devices and assistive technologies, Once they are smart, they have computer software embedded in them, and with that comes copyright owned by usually a technology provider, and they can use digital locks to protect that software. So when they protect that, they tend to lock the device up and not allow other people to access that device for tinkering or modifying or repairing those devices.
Troubleshooting, more than a technical problem-solving approach, it becomes an opportunity to improvise creatively with participants.
So I'm calling you.
Video call. Accept.
Hello.
What a bit like hang this one up.
Yes, let's do that.
Again, 2050 troubleshooting is not just the tech troubleshooter or the tech person comes in to fix the technology. 2050 troubleshooting is social troubleshooting. It's empathetic troubleshooting. It's really working with people.
The way that we are interpreting troubleshooting also includes the social layer of processes of seeking support, having the phone call, having technical assistant coming into the house or the workplace to share with us the process of figuring out and diagnosing what is it that's going on.
It's like it's coming from, whereas the one that you showed me was that.
Then position the container under the right-hand side of the engine.
Alright, see where the water's flowing?
Hmm.
If that was underneath, it'll be flowing this way. It's going down.
To drain is complete. Close the drain tap.
It's solid.
Yeah, and look, that's where that cable goes. Yes. That's where that cable sits.
And it's amazing how problem solving over a toaster or a kettle or a device, words aren't really needed, but there's this wonderful kind of sharing of knowledge and skills that happen.
So technically, troubleshooting restores errors, and because of that, it continues the functionality of things as it is expected. So that means durability, keeps up the promises of the devices as they were designed, e-waste can be prevented.
Oh, that's a mirror. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I can dance. And the thing, oh, this is so good.
Where we're talking about that transition from the physical object to an object that's now controlled by the software, we need the manufacturers to be able to give us access to those things as well.
Recognizing this is vital for ensuring humans and technology can have a sustainable work relationship in the future.
Troubleshooting might even be like one of the most important professional positions that people have, especially if we have so much more automated and robotic technology that actually one of the roles of humans might actually be to fix that technology.
But it's also a very fundamental step that we need in the green economy going forward to reach net zero is we need people to take things apart and save the precious metals and minerals that we have.
So troubleshooting is a hopeful story for future jobs in Australia.
Troubleshooting perfectly is.